let's start with a small experiment. Scenario 1. Option A, a 100% chance of losing $3,000. Option B, an 80% chance of losing $4,000 and 20% chance of losing nothing. Which one would you choose? Pause the video if you want. Take your time. Remember your choice until the end of the experiment. Now, let's change the situation a little bit. Scenario 2. Option C, a 100% chance of receiving $3,000. Option D, an 80% chance of receiving $4,000, and a 20% chance of receiving nothing. Which one would you choose from these two options? Once again, pause the video and take your time if you want. Before moving ahead, write your answer in the comments, because I want to know what your choices were before watching the full video. If you're like 80% of the people, you chose option B in first scenario and option C in second scenario. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, two renowned social psychologists, performed this experiment and asked these same questions to a group of people. In that experiment, 92% of participants chose option B in the first scenario. And 80% of the people chose option C in scenario 2. This experiment proved that most of the people are wired the same way. They tend to risk-averse in prospect of gains, but risk-seeking in prospect of loss. In simple words, people tend to avoid risk when they're winning, but they seek risk when they're faced with a loss. Let me show you how. In scenario 1, when you're faced with a loss, you had to choose from option A, 100% chance of losing $3,000, and option B, 80% chance of losing $4,000 and 20% chance of losing nothing. Option A has expectation of 1 times negative 3,000 is equal to minus 3,000. And option B has expectation of 0.8 times negative 4,000 is equal to minus 3,200. Now, tell me which is a bigger loss. It's option B. But 92% of people chose this. 92% of people chose the option with a bigger loss than small loss, which is diametrically opposite of what is required in trading. In trading, you have to cut losses small. This is what you've heard in almost all of my videos. It is just how our minds are wired. We love to play gamble when we're losing. Which is why you see, people don't cut their losses small. They hope and wait for a comeback, which seldom happens, and sooner or later they blow up their entire accounts. As I have previously stated, rule number 1 of trading is to avoid big losses. This clearly shows that our minds are wired to be risk-seeking when we are faced with loss. Let's move on to scenario 2. Here you had to choose between option C, a 100% chance of receiving $3,000. Option D, an 80% chance of receiving $4,000, and a 20% chance of receiving nothing. Option C has an expectation of 1 times 3,000 is equal to 3,000. And option D has an expectation of 0.8 times 4,000 is equal to 3,200. If you chose option C, there is no need to be embarrassed because that's what majority of people do. 80% of people chose option C in this scenario in Kahneman's experiment. 80% of people chose small profit over big. They choose guaranteed smaller profits over larger probable profits. In trading, you have to let our profits run. This is what we have learned from almost every successful trader. So why did people make these choices? Why are our brains wired this way? These biases exist because our brains evolved to prioritize immediate survival. The potential for immediate certain loss is more threatening to survival than potential gain, so our brains developed a bias to avoid loss. This is what we saw in scenario 1. People choose option B, because they thought that even though in option B the chances of not losing was small, but it wasn't zero as was in the option A. Option A was a certain loss. They wanted to avoid loss so badly that they chose the option that will lose them more money in the long run. This cognitive bias is termed as loss aversion in behavior finance. Losses are an inevitable part of trading, and you have to learn to accept them. Most importantly, keep them small and within your risk capacity. Similarly, our brains are wired to prefer certainty over uncertainty, as uncertainty can pose a threat to survival. In scenario 2, people demonstrated that they craved certainty more than probability, which is why they chose option A instead of option B, even though option B would make more money in the long run. This cognitive bias is termed as risk aversion in behavioral finance. In modern times, these biases can sometimes lead to irrational decisions, especially in complex situations like trading. Understanding these biases can help us make more rational decisions, but it's also important to remember that these biases are deeply ingrained and not easily overcome. It's part of being human. As a trader, you have to learn to identify such biases in your behavior and change them. You have to embrace risk and think in probabilities. Trading is all about probability. Markets are not certain, they're probabilistic. A successful trader understands this. He embraces risk and thinks in probabilities. He doesn't seek certainty where there is none. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to the channel and like the video.